I see some really impressive careers in the chat, 30 years, 9 years, 1 year. And I'm excited to see that there is this big range. We have some kind of newbies to the nonprofit space. We have some that have been here for a long time. Wonderful. Over 30. Wonderful. Great. So I think there's going to be a lot for us to talk about then. This is great. All right, so just a little about, introducing us to grants. So if we're about to use the Philanthropy Massachusetts Common Grant application, that means that we've determined that your organization is well positioned for grants. So that's the first thing that we need to kind of check off the list. So on a very basic level, what that means is that you are 501(c)(3) incorporated. You have programs with a proven impact. If you're a new nonprofit, maybe it means that you have run a pilot program so that you have proof of concept. And you have some metrics for success that you can demonstrate impact to the funder. So these are just a few things. There's I would say a longer checklist of how can you determine if you're well positioned for grants, but these are kind of the basic level things. So we're saying, okay, you're ready for grants. We're checking these things off the list. And now you have found a what we refer to as a right fit or a good fit funder. What that means to us as grant writers is that your nonprofit is aligned with the funder's mission, vision, and values. You've taken a look at what the geographic scope is that that funder supports and ensured that it aligns with your impact area as a nonprofit. You've taken a look at their giving initiatives as well and ensured that it aligns with the true need of your nonprofit at this time. And hopefully, you've looked at some of their past giving patterns to ensure that there's a strong likelihood there. What I like to do is I like to take a peek at a funder's 990 and see, how many grants are they giving in a year? What is their level of giving? Are they giving $5,000 grants or $50,000 grants? Gives me an idea of what a reasonable ask is. And also, are there nonprofits that they're giving to that are similar to our nonprofit? Just gives you a little bit of an idea. And we just have a little tip in the corner here. If stewardship really can help support lead to success of a grant. And so if you attend, for example, one of Philanthropy Massachusetts events and you happen to meet a funder, definitely make sure to follow up. It can really help your chances of getting a foot in the door with that funder. All right, so we have struck gold. We have found a funder in Massachusetts that uses the Philanthropy Massachusetts Common Grant application. This is great news because many funders will create their own proposals, as I'm sure many of you know, and they're asking for a lot of the same information, but they put it in their own format, and it feels like you have to recreate the wheel every time. So what's really great about this Common Grant application is that when funders agree to use it, it makes it so much easier where you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. You can kind of repurpose this format based on the funder that you're submitting to and have a clear process for, what type of information do you need to collect. So I'd like to invite everybody to grab the template. I wonder, Georgiana, would you be able to drop the link into the chat that brings people to this part of your website? And it's on the screen if anyone can't find it. It's just a little hard for me to drop it into the chat with my screen shared. I'll give everybody a minute there. Everybody able to access that? I think Georgiana's at dropping it into the chat shortly. Wonderful. Oh, no worries. Take your time. as we're pulling that up, um, just kind of look at our next slide to give us an idea. If you have it up on the side of your screen, what you are looking at, and let's see, awesome. Thank you so much, Georgiana, for dropping that into the chat. If you're still looking for it, just go ahead and click the link in the chat.
And you'll see Google, and sorry, I'm working on a different computer today. It's taking me longer to do some things. It's there's the Word and the Google or Google Docs option there. So you can click on them, either one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the Google Doc option, myself, just because it makes it easy to save. But yeah, so if you have that pulled up, what you're seeing is, of course, there's kind of this almost like a cover sheet section where it's just the basic information, how many people do you have on staff, what's your address, etc. We're not going to go through all those little details. Those are pretty straightforward. But instead, what we're going to look at are the narrative questions. And there's really 5 sections to it. There's your organization, your community, your program slash project funding request, your impact, and then there's an other section. And we'll talk about, what is our approach to that. So jumping right in, it may be helpful, I will say, if you have maybe a notes document open or a pen and paper, because there's going to be moments where I'm asking you to kind of read through a few things and think about, are there things that you might change, some notes to take? So feel free if you need to open a document and jot down a few notes. This first section that we're going to look at has a few questions involved. It has your organization. Now, the first piece is they're asking us to provide the board-approved mission statement and a brief organizational history. Pretty straightforward. I would say, funders are going to ask for this no matter what type of application format they're using. So this is fairly standard. Then we're going to share your current programs and accomplishments. And we want to emphasize here any achievements of the recent past. So this is a good opportunity to kind of brag a little bit. Share any recent major changes to your financial and/or organizational circumstances. So perhaps you have a new executive director or you have an interim executive director. This is something you'd want to flag. Say your organization is being impacted by federal funding cuts. This is something that you'd want to flag as well. That's a recent major financial change. And then describe what goals, if any, your organization has developed around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think about how you track progress towards these goals. Now, when we read these questions, I like to step back and think about what are the funders really going to be looking for, and what are some things we might avoid in this process. So right away, we want to think about this section almost as an elevator pitch. It's your first introduction to the organization. You want to go into this imagining that they have never heard of you, they don't know who you are. So you want it to be crystal clear and think about it as if this is the very first time that you're meeting this funder. And again, we already kind of mentioned this, but we're talking about any major financial or organizational changes. What I recommend is try to think about putting a positive, spin on it when you can. Sometimes when you say, we're in transition with our leadership, or we just hired a new executive director, we want to assure funders that you're in a solid position. So you might say that you're excited that you brought on a new executive director with a really bold vision for the organization and a plan to take it to new heights. So just try to be positive when you're talking about that if you can, without, being untruthful. I would say really try to avoid using too much jargon or overly technical language. Remember, there are real people that are reading this. So when you're applying to, say, a foundation grant, a family foundation or a corporate foundation, this is much different than applying to a federal grant. If you're applying for federal funding, it is very technical, and they want you to use that technical language. A foundation grant, we're thinking about people who are just everyday people. You want to convince them that what you're doing is important, and you want to use real stories where you can add testimonials, kind of have that warm and fuzzy language, like you're trying to build a relationship with this funder when you're going into this. I will always kind of have an eye as well for acronyms. I see this happen a lot where you might have some common acronyms that are used all the time in your particular work, and you sort of just expect that, well, everybody knows what this acronym stands for. But in actuality, the funder may not. The funder may support your sector along with several other sectors. So if there's an acronym that maybe you're working in the education space, and I'm trying to think of an acronym for the education space, DESE, for example, the Department of Early and Secondary Education, I believe is the acronym. But if you just write DESE, they may not know right off the bat. Hopefully, they know what it is, but they may not. And so it's really important that you're defining the full term, and then you can put the acronym in parentheses and then use the acronym a little bit later on. But always make sure you're defining that. All right. So this is where, and actually, I'm going to pause here before we go into the next piece. Are there any questions so far about this kind of initial piece? I know we have like a comfortable size group today. There's only 17 of us total, so I want to make sure we have a chance, to touch base on any questions as we're going through this. I see a quick question. How do we know if the funder accepts this application and not insist on their online app? That's a great question. And I see that from Kathy. So typically what I find is that a funder will name it right on their website or on their application process. It will say, we use the Philanthropy Massachusetts Common Application format. So it's usually pretty straightforward. I think sometimes a funder, if they have an online portal, it might say, upload your Philanthropy Massachusetts Common Grant app here. So, it depends how they want it to be submitted, whether it's by email or portal, but they're usually pretty straightforward. I think that's the only question that I see. Feel free to drop questions into the chat or even raise your Zoom hand and you can come off mute and we can kind of go from there. So for this section, we're going to actually break it down and we're going to look at, as grant writers, how would we approach this? Now, you might be looking at this and saying, this is crazy, like to have this specific of terminology that we use. But actually, at LMA Grant Consulting, when we're training new team members, we use very specific kind of standardized language to get us started. And then once we kind of get us started, we look at this as a checklist and say, let's make sure we have these things, and then we can change it, add your tone, make sure it sounds like your voice. But this is kind of just a starting place. Now we will share, I believe Philanthropy Massachusetts will share the slide deck with you afterwards. So don't feel like you have to write all of this down very quickly. You'll have access to it later on. But again, look at this as a guide. So the way that we would approach this is right off the bat, we would say our organization, which is based in this location, is a nonprofit with a mission to do X. I like to be really crystal clear. Like, this is our board approved mission. Our goal is to expand on X, Y, and Z. I like to include that because sometimes, ideally your mission statement makes it very clear what you do, but sometimes some organizations have a little bit of a broad mission statement. Sometimes it might say things like, we support K through 12 education or the success of all children. And it's a little bit more, I would say, of a vision statement. We want the funder to really understand what you do, so let's add a little bit more of a description. Then we're going to go into that history. We were founded in this year, and we started as a humble organization that only worked with this many students or X, Y, and Z. You want to just explain how have you changed over the years. Today, we are reaching this many individuals in this geographic area, and these are our programs. Now, this is a place where we can be kind of brief. I recommend, using bullet points and a brief explanation because there's going to be an area later on in this application that you can provide really deep detail on the specific program that you're asking for support on. Right now, you just want to kind of summarize what are your programs. So if you have 3 programs, we put a sentence or 2 after each program so that the funder gets a clear picture. Our team is particularly proud of our recent achievements, which include X, Y, and Z. So there's a little bit more to this. If you have gone through any recent changes, this is where you can include it. If you haven't gone through any major organizational or fiscal changes, you may not actually need that part for this question, but this is recognizing, again, if you have financial or organizational changes. I like to then, kind of as we talk about how can we look at that positively? So maybe since we've had, for example, our new executive director, our organization has had these positive changes since then, and they have enabled us to do X, Y, and Z. Operationally, our organization has, and again, this is kind of still going into any organizational shifts. So it has experienced noticeable shifts within our structure. Again, this is kind of templated language to help you get started. Sometimes you might look at that blank page and feel like, how do we talk about these financial or organizational changes? So look at this as a starting place, and then you can kind of add in your own tone. This last piece goes into that last question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so remember, we are answering a question about how are you committed to DEI, and then how are you measuring that success? So make sure that you're answering that piece as well. So we track progress through these metrics. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to drop this link into the chat. We're going to, let me see if I can pull the chat up while I'm sharing my screen. We're going to look at this sample response. So this is just for your organization section. We're answering 4 main questions. We have this fictional nonprofit LMA, really creative there. And nonprofit LMA is going to be a youth program. So what I want you to do is take a few minutes and read through this and think about, there are some subtle areas that could be improved. Take a minute, 2-3 minutes to read through. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms and have a little bit of a conversation. Talk with your fellow colleagues about, what could be changed to make this better, make it a stronger response. take a little bit to read this first. I realize some of us are probably still reading through and thinking, but I'm going to go ahead and send us into breakout rooms so you can continue to kind of brainstorm, but alongside your fellow participants. While you're in that room, again, the question is, what can be done to strengthen this response? It's not a terrible response, but it could be a little bit better. So we'll go ahead and send everybody in. Any questions before we send everyone to the breakout rooms? No? Okay. Welcome back. I think people will be trickling back in, it looks like for the next 30 seconds. We're just waiting for a couple more. Hope everyone had a good conversation. All right. Looks like everyone's back. So before we move forward, I'd love to pull this back up. And what I'll do is try to make it a little bit bigger. I know it's sometimes smaller when I'm sharing my screen. Um, but I would love to hear from folks, about what you spoke about in the breakout rooms. How could we improve this? So thinking about some of those tips that we spoke about, some do's and don'ts and just areas to strengthen it. Feel free to, you can just come off mute or you can raise your hand. It's not a huge group, so I think we can manage pretty well if you want to just come off mute.
Ahmad, do you want to go? Didi? Yeah, I mean, I think you can talk on our behalf, on our group one.
Oh my goodness, Shilpa. I was counting
Sorry,
on
did I put you on the
individual
spot?
group. No, okay. I'll try to reconstruct what we discussed. Yeah, so we had a great group. It was a nice exchange, some good ideas. And feel free, my teammates, to correct me if I go wrong. But one thing that came up was for some of these things, progress on the DEI front, for example, or sort of the success of some of the individual programs, some metrics to give an idea of the impact of these programs and of the DEI work that they're doing. What else, team?
Yeah, some metrics about the demographics and
Oh, right,
description
right.
about, yeah, where where are the students from? I think
Hmm.
in our group, we also talked about, some more description about the type of youth, like
Right,
at
right.
risk, just type of youth. We
Hmm.
talked about that.
Focusing on specifics.
Right,
Specifics, yes.
right, right.
Yes, Lisa.
Yeah.
And I think in the beginning, where it says nonprofit LME is a Boston-based nonprofit, like I was wondering, like because there is usually a limit on character count or word count mostly, and I think using that very consciously like would make it better. So I think using Boston-based 501(c)(3), like where we are describing that it's a nonprofit, that can go like we do that in the beginning when we talk about the organization. So maybe we can use these words mindfully, to write a better statement about what our mission is and who we
Yeah.
serve. So I think that description
I
would help.
agree. Yeah, I agree. When I read this, it feels kind of flat. Like it
Mm,
doesn't feel very punchy. When I read a grant application, I want to be inspired. I want to feel moved and feel like whoever's writing it is really passionate about what they're talking about. And this just feels, it's not bad, but it's
Mhm.
just kind of flat. It just doesn't really have that punchy feel. And I agree. I think that the details about like demographics and especially metrics could be improved. Anyone else from maybe any of the other groups? And it's okay if not.
I'm from the same group, but I just had one thing that I just noticed. Um, where it says they started by serving one middle school in Dorchester, and then it says today now the nonprofit reaches 1,200 students. I feel like again, including like some stats or something that says like how many schools they serve now versus like how
Mhm.
many students.
Schools versus students. Yeah, the measurements don't align. First we're saying one middle school, there could be 1,200 students in one middle school. We don't know, how many schools are we now surveying? Absolutely. I also want to know more about this middle school. Why was this important? What was impactful? How did it then grow? Yeah, absolutely. So again, not a terrible response, but could be improved a bit. Excellent. So I'm gonna pull my screen down for a second because I want to make sure I'm sharing the correct screen in a moment. Let me go back to our slide deck. I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with some of these things. And so now you kind of have an idea of, okay, what types of things are we going to look for? Our next section, we're really going to be looking at the need. Now, this one we'll also look at in a breakout room. A little bit later, we're actually going to look at two sections at once in the breakout room, and we'll have a little bit more time, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So moving on to this next piece, we're going to talk about your community. So there's three questions involved in this section. First, we're going to say briefly describe the opportunity, challenge, issue, or need that your organization works to address and for whom, including the socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, and language. So think of this, and funders sometimes frame this as what is the need statement and who is the audience? So, what's the challenge, the problem that you're addressing? Then you're going to think about any collaborations. So if you're working with other organizations or if you're in a coalition to advance this work, they want to know about that. And then we're thinking about the community-driven piece. So how does your organization listen to or involve constituents of the community? So one way that I like to think about this, and oops, it looks like we actually skipped over. My apologies. There was an extra slide in there. One way that I like to think about this that actually isn't necessarily written right here is if your organization didn't exist, we're thinking about the need. If it didn't exist, then what would happen? If nobody was addressing the problem, the challenge that you are addressing, what would be the outcome to your constituents? And then why is it important that you're doing what you're doing? Then, something that funders are really looking for. So we're kind of reading between the lines here. It's not asked in this question, but something we want to think about. How do you address this particular need differently than similar nonprofits? So, for example, when I think about the nonprofit space, I don't think about it in the form of competition, but for this example, we're going to kind of look at it like that. Um, if you sent in an application to a funder and they have your application on their desk, and a similar organization also sent in an application, Why are they going to choose to fund your organization over this other nonprofit? Now, ideally, in the nonprofit space, maybe you're collaborating with that organization. Nonprofits are very collaborative. That's kind of the hope. Again, I don't love this idea of competition in the space, but in reality, when we're thinking about funding, you need to be able to show how you're different and why it's important that what you're doing stands out. You also, again, you want to dig into that community-driven piece. Now, some things that I would avoid is using outdated data or sources. A need statement is a great place to pull in some data to prove your point, but just make sure it's relevant. Again, just a reminder, avoid using overly technical language or jargon. Make it easy for anyone to pick this up and understand and be convinced that this is a serious need. So let's take a look at how we might break this down. When we approach a need statement, I like to use this language that your organization meets a critical unmet need and then describe what that need is. So really pointing out that if it weren't for you, this need would not be addressed. And then again, it's not written there right in the question, but we're sort of reading between the lines. Consider what would happen if this need wasn't addressed. Then going into the details about while some programs exist to do this, we are unique in our approach, and then we'll explain how. To further advance our mission, we partner with these organizations. It's really important to explain what you're doing with these partnerships. So sometimes I'll see grants where the writer is just kind of listing the partnerships, but it doesn't give me much of a story there. I want to understand what is the benefit of you collaborating with those organizations? Why are you partnering or why are you in this coalition? So think about the value or the impact of that partnership. And then addressing that last question is, ensuring that you're community driven. We're involving our community in the development of our programs, and you do this. Now, if you're reading this and you're thinking, oh boy, we don't incorporate our community, this could be a moment for you to step back and have a conversation with your team, because you do want to think about you're meeting the needs of a specific constituent base. So you want to make sure that you understand the need correctly, and so that you're incorporating feedback from your community and that your community has a seat at the table when you're determining what your programs are. So very similar to what we just did. Let's pull up, I'm going to drop this link into the chat if I can find my chat button. Going to drop this link into the chat, and we have an example here. So we have those 3 questions for this section. It's a little bit shorter. We'll give you a couple minutes just to read through. And very similarly, just think about how could this be strengthened? Another minute or 2 to read through. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to send you into the breakout rooms again. We'll do 8 minutes again. When we come back, we'll debrief, and then before moving on, we're going to take a short break before we move on. So we're about halfway through our session. So let's do this breakout room first, collaborate, and then come back and go from there. Are there any questions before we go into the breakout room? No? Okay, let me see if I can set a timer on the breakout room so that you can see how much time there is. And I think we are good. All right, we'll see you in a little bit. Community that you're reaching, any partnerships, and how you're community driven. So these are actually three pretty big, impactful questions, kind of a short response. So I'm hoping that we can find some ways to improve this. Feel free to if you'd like to raise your hand or just come off mute is completely fine. I'm also
I'll
happy to
just jump
call on
in.
people.
I know we talked about, I run a youth program, so it's 16 to 24-year-olds, and we have 11 programs just in Massachusetts for our coalition and 377 or more programs across the world in the country, and now we're international. And I've never wrote a grant where I talked about, while some programs exist to, I've never talked about those other programs. I just focus on what I'm doing here in New Bedford and how we can improve on that. I don't do the comparison because I don't think that's important in what I'm trying to get across. If I'm trying to get you to love what I do, I don't think there's a need to talk about what other people are doing, if that makes any sense.
I definitely hear that. I think one way of thinking about that piece too is sometimes funders might want to know how do you make sure that you're not replicating services that already exist in the community. So that's another kind of angle to think about, and I think what you're saying is really important. What am I doing? What is our organization doing that's really great? So,
Right. It's a
I
little
think there's
different
ways
for
of
us in
framing
that
it
our
that's,
youth build
yeah.
programs have to run the same way with little
Yeah.
differences. So it's more about showing how we do it differently than the other
Yeah.
youth build programs. We're still modeling the same youth build principles, but this is how we approach the subject, if that makes any sense. So it's not about duplicating because we're all doing the same thing, but how do we do it better?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And I think that's a great framing. How are we unique? How are we doing this
Mhm.
even better? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
maybe how you're doing it better in order to serve the needs of your
mhm.
community versus other communities could have different needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a really great point because in this question, we're talking about the specific demographic that you're reaching. So you can say, we are unique in the sense that we are created in a way that specifically meets the needs of this particular demographic. Maybe it's the language needs, maybe it's an access question. I think that's a great point, Tammy. Anything else? Something that I personally noticed in this is, uh, we're not really giving any specific data, and I see a needs statement as a good place to prove the need in a way that's backed up with some evidence. And so, there's a few ways you can do that. You can bring data and evidence in and cite it. And also, you could give examples of actual stories in your community. So I would say throughout any part of grant writing, being able to tie in real stories can be really impactful. Now, we could go into a whole other session about how to do that in an equitable and trauma-informed way. Because when you're collecting stories, you want to make sure that you're honoring the storyteller, that you're being respectful of who you're talking about. But kind of a separate topic there, but there's ways that you can incorporate stories as well. So you could say, for example, we have, one constituent that had this need, and our program was necessary because they couldn't access these tools otherwise. So kind of demonstrating a need in that way, and also, potentially pulling in some data and sources that you can cite there. Any other thoughts, or did any other groups have other things they wanted to add?
We had an interesting point come up where uh, the observation was made that we would want to portray our own organization as being, the best, or outstanding or unique, in a way that uh, doesn't that doesn't show other programs in a negative light, which doesn't come across as aggressively like competitive, or what is your guidance on that, Lynn?
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. Again, there's this fine line between showing that you are the one that the funder should choose without coming across as aggressive or competitive. So something that you might want to think about, or a framing, is, do your services complement other services that exist in the community? So again, thinking about, rather than replicating existing services, how does your program complement maybe other programs that your constituents might already be reaching? And again, kind of building on, we are unique in the sense that we provide our programs for this particular language, or maybe your programs are accessible regardless of ability to pay. That's something that a lot of organizations are thinking about. How can we offer these programs for free? So, I think using that language of how it's complementing existing programs in the community is a great way to frame it. Yeah, great question.
Sorry, I had a
Yeah,
couple
go
of points.
Yeah.
One is like maybe we could mention some or refer some of the research that's available
Yeah.
on the existing geographical area we serve, and the impact. There are a lot of reports and research that's there. I think that those data points can help us describe our programs better and why the need with,
Yeah.
and then I feel like uh, in the third paragraph, I think we talk about partnerships with local schools and community, but we don't mention the names, which ones, and
Mm,
that would have been a better like way to talk about, like, we are informed, we know who does what and how we,
yeah.
like, why we are partnering with these people. And lastly, I think the last paragraph, to ensure the work about truly community driven involving. I think, how do they do that? Like, a little bit knowing about how do you do it, because my organization, usually BCNC, we serve immigrants and we have a lot of programs, but um, English is not the first language of the people we serve. So there are different channels through which we communicate with our participants. So, how do we do it? And then what is the impact of that? Maybe some kind of person. I feel like those could have enhanced this section better, like, described it
Yeah.
better. That's my view. And we discussed this
Absolutely.
in our group one.
Yeah. Absolutely. Again, this section, it answers the questions, but I would say in a very surface level way. I think almost in all areas it really could be expanded on. I think you hit a lot of the key points, Shilpa. I think using metrics, defining these partnerships a little bit more, like who are the actual partners, and talking about what you said, like adding more information about the how for how are you community driven and talk about, how is that participation happening. Excellent. And I feel like a few people really talked about, avoiding competitive language and how do we talk about our work in the community as collaborative and supportive and complementary of other organizations. I think that's really powerful and and also emphasizes that you're inclusive within the community. So let's pause there. We are a little over halfway through the session. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Feel free to go get some water, move your legs, get a snack, whatever you might need. I am going to set a timer on my end of 5 minutes. Feel free to turn your camera off. Right now it's 11:17, so we'll come back at 11:22. We'll see you then.
And Lynn, when we come back, there were 2 questions in the chat that sort of
Right.
work together. One about character limits on applications other than this one, obviously, where they want you to answer pretty much everything in one answer. And then citations, which kind of ties into that character issue too. So,
Great.
great.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you. And I will say, wordsmithing to really fit into those short character limits can be really just time consuming and challenging sometimes. And what's great about the Philanthropy Massachusetts Common Grant application format is that the recommended length is a 5-page maximum for the whole thing. So when you're looking at all the questions together and you're formatting it nicely, 5 pages is the maximum. I have found that to be a great length for this. And keep in mind, you do not need to reach 5 pages. It can be 3 pages. That's okay. Vendors also like it when you're concise. So it's not a bad thing if you do not max out that length. So for this format, 5 pages is the preferred maximum. And talking about citing sources, and Georgiana, feel free to jump into if you have thoughts on this for this particular format. But sometimes when we're thinking about, someone said, do you include a hyperlink if possible? Sometimes it kind of depends on how you're submitting it. If you're submitting something by mail, hyperlinking it may not make the most sense. I have done it before where you're including the name of the article in parentheses. I have included the hyperlink. Another way that I have done it with this format is including a footnote. So when you insert a footnote, it'll add that little number after the sentence, and then you look at your footnote and you can put the hyperlink in, and it's referencing that. There is no required or standardized way necessarily to include these sources. So it's kind of dependent on, again, that spacing and your own preference there. But definitely citing the sources is important. Absolutely. Yeah, there's really no wrong way. And I agree. We do that as well. We'll say, according to this organization who did a study on this date, these were the findings. And then, if you can include, whether it's the link or a footnote or any kind of format, there's no really wrong way there. It's not like, I feel like when you're in college, like there are specific ways that you should be citing sources, but this is a little bit different. So, all right, let's go ahead and jump back in. Actually, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Let me make sure I have the correct item pulled up. One moment. And can everyone see my slides? Yep, great. All right. So let's go to the next section. So in this next piece, we're going to go through the next 2 sections of the Common Grant application before we go into our breakout rooms. And the reason is because in both of these sections, we're going to be talking about metrics. So it may be helpful, we are going to look at the response, like two separate sections. So we're going to look at those different responses. So it may be helpful just to kind of take a few notes on the side so that you're ready to have that conversation when we go into the breakout rooms. So the program or project funding request. This is where we're going to talk about what do you want to do as far as your specific activities and the timeline. Why do you want to do it? So what is the opportunity, challenge, issue, or need? We're kind of referencing that piece again. And who will be impacted? Now, we've talked about this a little bit already in the community section, but this is getting more specific into what you are going to do, say, with the funding from this particular funder. How are you going to incorporate those funds? What's the impact? Thinking about what are the funders really looking for. This is your chance to shine. They want to understand what your program is. I think of it as if they close their eyes, I want them to be able to visualize your day-to-day. What is your program doing? Why is it important? And specifically, try to think about how funding will be used to achieve your goals. I like to really be concrete there. And again, we talked about this a little bit before when we were looking at one of the responses, and we said, why, this doesn't feel passionate, but this really is a great opportunity to show that passion, show the excitement for your work. And I will say this is also a place that sometimes we can get a little carried away. So let's try to avoid any extraneous information. Try to be concise, concrete, to the point, while also including enough information for the funder to really visualize what you do. So let's look at the breakdown. How would we respond to this? So I like to, when I'm working with my team of writers, something that I like to recommend is for something like this, starting out with a very straightforward, direct sentence that says, we are kindly requesting support from your foundation in the amount of this much money, and it will go towards this program. So this is just a really concrete ask. And this is the type of area that I would put it in is this particular section. Then let's go into naming your program and describing in detail what it is that you do. What is this program? So we're saying we would like funding to support this program. This program is. Now, we need to explain, why do we need funding now? While we've seen great success in this program, maybe right now we're seeing, more people are asking for our services than what we can actually provide, which means maybe we need to hire more staff or we need to do X, Y, and Z. So try to explain why now. Why do you need funding? And then with the support of this funder, we will be able to deepen the impact on this specific population. Remember, we have to touch on that part of the question, what the population is. And then think about what are the goals that you'll be able to achieve with this funder's support. So specifically, also thinking about, we're kind of jump to the end a little bit, but what that time frame is for achieving these goals or these activities. I like to include a little bit then of, how will the funds be used? And to make this project possible, what are the steps, the activities that will have to take place, and any partnerships involved? So let's just make sure, we're looking at what those questions are. What do you do? So again, we're going back here. What activities and time frame are you doing? Are you planning? Again, what's that need and who will be impacted? So we're making sure we're checking off all of those areas. Now, let's take a look at a sample response. I'm going to drop this into the chat. Now, take a few minutes to kind of read through. You might want to kind of, again, save this, keep it on the side. Take a few notes for what you want to talk about in the group, because we won't go directly to that breakout room just yet. Do another minute. Just jot down a few ideas, or even kind of maybe mentally think about a few ideas of how this could be improved if this was your grant that you were writing a proposal for. All right. And we're going to kind of hold on that piece for a moment. And we're actually going to combine this with our next section before we go into a breakout room. So this next section, we're going to talk about your impact. So what does success look like? How do you track success? How do you know you're moving towards it? So what funders are really looking for when we're talking about goals, metrics, success, we want to think about SMART goals. So SMART goals, we're thinking about specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So we've all kind of heard that acronym before, but this is really important, both with goal setting and with metrics for success. Now, we also want to make sure that we're explaining to a funder, how do we know that we're successful and how are we measuring that success? So what is the actual tool for success? I'd like to think about this section as another great opportunity to share some real stories. So it's not in the prompt necessarily, but I think about the impact section as a great place to show recent impact and saying, this is a recent story or these are recent metrics of success. Use a combination of both as well. Show metrics, show testimonials, include qualitative and quantitative. I would say something to avoid is metrics that maybe don't align with the specific success of this program. So, sometimes we might say, well, we want to make sure that we get good feedback on a program. Yes, that's important, but also let's show the direct impact. We want to show maybe increased graduation rates. We want to show, that a specific skill is learned. So when we're talking about this, pretty straightforward. For our organization, success means, and then we're going to list the SMART goals, and where we can include both qualitative and quantitative goals. To measure these goals, this is our process. We collect data in this way. Recent examples of success include X, Y, and Z. So very straightforward. let's go ahead and look at this example. We're going to drop this into the chat. You can take a look at this. A minute or two to read through. All right. Now, I know many of us are probably still just reading through this. We are going to take this time to go into our breakout rooms. We're going to discuss both of those sections kind of together because we're talking about goal setting, we're talking about activities, and we're talking about the impact. So there is a lot to cover, but take this time to connect with those in your group. Any questions before we go into the breakout rooms? No? All right, we'll see you in about 8 minutes. All right. So as everyone trickles back in, I know there was a lot to talk about in that breakout room. We kind of packed a few things in there. So why don't we start by looking first at the program request. So this is the first piece where we're asking, how much are we asking for? What is the program? What are our goals? And kind of that timeline and activities piece. So again, there's a lot in here. There's also kind of some of that additional info that we gave tips on, things that we feel that funders are really looking for. Would love to hear some feedback. What are some thoughts of how we could strengthen this section a bit? Feel free to just come off mute, use your hand. If you're too shy, you can also share in the chat as well.
Breakout room one was there are a lot of great ideas. There's no need for people to be shy. I'll start us off though. One comment, one observation was that this prompt, this response can use more smart goals.
Yes.
So that's one area for improvement. What else, team?
They're asking for like $75,000, but they don't really specify. I guess it goes back to the SMART goals, but they don't really specify why they need it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah,
maybe
right. Oh, sorry, Lynn. I've worked on applications where they ask you for a line by line budget. So, and even if it doesn't explicitly require that, I think that would be very, very helpful for funders to see.
Yeah. I am a big supporter of being really detailed when we're
Yeah.
talking about the money. When I read this, even looking at where it says funds will be used towards mentor training, part of me, it feels a little vague.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Are we paying the trainers? Are we I see here that we're also talking about staff time and materials. So for me, I want a little more information.
Mhm.
You know, we I agree, having a detailed budget breakdown, maybe we'll have the Philanthropy Massachusetts budget attached to this, but honestly, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit more budget detail in here of, what are we asking for sure. Anyone else? I think you hit the nail on the head here with using more SMART goals as well. If we look at this, for example, the second bullet point, excuse me, expand access to college and career workshops for all participants. Not really being specific. Maybe the goal could be more aligned to, how many people are you trying to reach, or how many workshops are you trying to provide? Um, what is the completion rate that you're aiming for? What is the timeline that you're thinking about? Same when we say things like improve confidence. Well, how do we know that we're improving the confidence? What are the metrics for that? So we want to be a bit more specific. Um, why don't we go over to the impact prompt? Any thoughts, feedback on this? How could this be strengthened? And it's okay if the answer is very similar, because we are looking at some similar pieces here.
All right, another comment that came up in our breakout room was the importance of tying the specific project or program goals with the mission of the organization, so that it all ties together, it all aligns.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to add that as a comment here. Great. Anything else? Do we feel like all three of these metrics would be considered SMART goals?
No,
Yeah,
definitely.
no, not at all. I think in our group we also discussed about like how these goals, sorry, the outcomes should be very specific as well,
Mhm.
tying into like, are we achieving the goals that we have stated in the previous question, and then are the outcomes aligning with the goals that we have specified earlier? Yeah.
Ah, how can we tie the
And
goals, the outcomes?
yeah, and a little bit about like more detail about like how we track it, like what is the system we use? Do we use any platforms? How do we collect that information from our constituents? How do we I think some more detailing
Yeah,
is required here. Also, staff, how many staff? Who is
yeah,
this? Who is this person? So, and through which, also I think it can be helpful if we mention, like, by the end of the program, are we going to measure all these outcomes, or is it throughout, or is it a process? We want to do it while we are, running this program. Is it just one time thing? Or, I think the qualitative
yeah,
thing can keep happening throughout. So I think that specific is also missing there. Actually, I had a question
yeah,
about uh, about the project in the program and project funding
yeah.
document. We talk about the like there is in the question it mentions about the need, the opportunity challenge
Mm,
issue or need, and this need is like something that we've written earlier about. So
yeah.
I when I write it's like, oh, there is need about the organization and need of this program, the whole program by itself, and then there is a need here. So how do I
Hmm.
distinguish that and be very smart about, like, the word count? And there are too many things, like, right, too many
Yeah,
criteria to be followed, word count, and then just fit in this need. So I had that
yeah.
question.
Yeah, and this is really thinking about like the need for this specific fund. So it's going a little bit deeper. The need for the program earlier was kind of the big picture. Why should this program exist? So now, why do you need funding to support this program? Maybe it's to sustain the program, and that's okay. Like we need funding to sustain the program. Or maybe you need funding to expand the program, or to grow capacity. So, earlier we talked a bit about kind of the big picture need for the program. Now we're talking a little bit more about specifically right now, this is what our need is. Does that make sense? It is a little repetitive, but it's kind of digging into the specifics a bit more.
Yeah, I think the problem arises when it's an existing program and we have like spoken about that program, described it overall, in the
Yeah.
beginning. And then when we want to like, when we reach this question, we want to write
Yeah.
about this question, and there will be some kind of repetition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
And that does happen.
thank
That
you.
does happen in grants.
Yeah.
You're right. I see it a lot in even in different types of proposal formats where I'm like, oh, I feel like I answered this already. So then you have to think about how can I do this a little differently so
Differently, yeah.
that so it's still it's not too repetitive. Since we only
Yeah.
have a couple minutes left, I do want to just skip ahead to kind of our very last piece, and this one will be very brief. We won't even go into breakout rooms because I think it'll be really obvious for us and we can talk through it together. There's this final section that says other. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Now, maybe there is. Maybe there is something that really comes to mind that you're like, I really wanted to hit on this. Great. Use that section to hit on whatever you feel like you haven't answered yet. But if you've come to this section and you're like, I just don't know what else I can add. I feel like I've repeated myself over and over. How can I possibly include more? I like to then use this section as a place where we can remind the funder how we are well aligned with their mission and close it out with some contact information and thanking them for their consideration. I would avoid using this to be repetitive of other sections because, like you mentioned, Shilpa, maybe you've been a little repetitive already. So let's just talk about how are we well aligned. Very straightforward. We appreciate the depth of support that you provide in this area of work. Given that our work is also in this sector, we believe our missions may be well aligned and would welcome the opportunity to partner with you. Should you have any questions, here's our contact information, and we thank you for our consideration. Really quickly, let's look at what a response that could be improved looks like. And we can even read this out loud. We appreciate the depth of support that your foundation provides to organizations doing youth development, mentorship, and education enrichment. Given our work in the area of career readiness and academic support for underserved youth, we believe our missions may be well aligned and welcome the opportunity to partner with you. Now, let's be real. We need money and think your foundation has a bunch. Given that we really need cash and can't pay our staff in pizza, we think this could be a perfect fit. If you have questions about how awesome we are, please contact us. Thanks a bunch. Now, I think it's obvious how this could be improved and that we don't want to end our grant proposal on, not being very classy. But if any of you follow, I'm blanking on his name, but Nonprofit AF, Vu Lee, I almost forgot. He has a lot of posts about how wouldn't it be nice to be brutally honest with funders. And so this was kind of inspired by his work. So this is a really kind of an obvious and funny way to end it. But with that being said, we're going to share this, this slide deck with you afterwards. There is an example that you'll find in here of a strong response. Even with the strong response, I'm sure you all are pros now. You'll find other ways that this could be improved, but this really combines everything that we've worked on today, but with a little bit of improvement in each of these sections, adding smart